Good afternoon. Welcome to Long Live Third Parties Podcast. Free Press Media Press Inc., a third parties books publisher, sponsors this podcast. I'm Andrew Bichard. Greetings, Barbara. How's it going today?
Oh, great. How are you doing, Andrew?
I can't complain too much. Welcome to our podcast. Folks, today we have a guest on the podcast, Barbara McVeigh from California. She's running for governor of California under the Green Party. So thank you for coming on to our show today, Barbara.
It's such a pleasure. Thank you so much, Andrew, for reaching out. I really look forward to this talk with you.
Excellent. We like to get started by having you give us a background about yourself and how you got involved in the Green Party.
All right. Well, background on myself. I think I have to start with my first political education at age 13, waiting for the FBI to come arrest my father. It was really set the stage for my development in a unfortunate but actually very powerful way as I get to look back on the 40 years that it introduced me to the power of media, politics, and also ourselves as the people and the power that we have. My father was in the 1981 National Union strike against President Ronald Reagan. Most of these union members were Vietnam veterans, and they were taking a stand for fair wages and honesty in politics. And that's what they were standing for after being given political campaign promises under Reagan, who touted himself as a union president. And after years of them trying to negotiate fair contracts and pretty much giving up until Reagan came along and said, here, this is what I'll do for you. And surely enough, they backed the president. And 1 year later, they recognized that he had lied. What do you do? What do you do when the government lies to you and you realize the responsibility that you had as a union to take a stand, right? They did the ultimate sacrifice, and 11,500 union members, and we were families. I mean, we were working class families, Andrew, took a stand against the president, willing to lose their jobs and be federal criminals because it was illegal for them to strike as federal employees. Okay. And they were really trying to take a stand for the American people. They really were. I was 13 going to the union meetings, watching the media come in, take stories and twist them around. And we became the bad guys. We became the selfish ones who only cared about ourselves. And that's how the media portrayed us. And within 48 hours, my dad lost his job. And believe me, trying to get a job again after you stood up to the president in a union strike, it's a hard go. So we spent years after that strike in emotional and financial turmoil. It was some really hard years. I wrote a book about it. It's called Redemption. And for years, I was actually very angry at my father because we went broke. And I lost all my dreams, college, my guitar lessons. I mean, everything that a kid believes they should have, right? Or, you know, we were simple middle-class people. We weren't rich or anything. But boy, they were hard years. But I'll tell you, it was about 7 years ago, Andrew, that I kind of woke up to really what has happened these last 40 years. And I started to dig deeper, recognizing, boy, I honor not only my father, but those other 11,500 union members who really showed us the power as the people to really stand up and understand that when you stand for truth and honesty and you're willing to put yourself on the front line, the kind of integrity that leaves you. And I really believe that union strike was probably the last act of high-level integrity in this country. And it's time to give those guys, and there were some women too, I don't want to say all guys, but those union members, the kind of credit that they deserve. So as I started to unwind these last 40 years, which I call the Reagan era, as we've had 40 years of trickle-down economics, knockdown of labor unions, the knockdown of the fairness doctrine ruling, which is about media and getting both sides of the media story, not just one side, which is ultimately propaganda. When I start to see that Jimmy Carter had actually pushed the first Green Deal and tried to stop climate change, and that was released very thoroughly in a couple of recent films. One is Carterland, another one is called A Road Not Taken. And you start to see this 40-year era that we've had. And, it's just now that we're talking about trickle-down economics, but we don't need a trickle up, as Biden says. We need a bottoms up, full-fledged push. And I think California is in position to take that lead. We've always taken the lead on values and movement. We've kind of lacked these values and movement for the last 40 years, but it's time to remember the power of the people. And I'm not getting that kind of messaging from our political leaders today. I see the handouts. I don't want handouts. I want to be able to take a stand and join my other fellow Americans in a way that we, the people, can take the charge that we need to take. And there are enough of us who want to do that. But we need policies to allow the people to take that stand and make the shift that we need on an economic, political, environmental, educational, and health movement like never before.
Thank you for sharing that. That gives us a good background of who you are and how you got involved in politics.
It's been a real ride. I'll be the first to raise my hand to say it's been a journey. And I fall in line with so many other Americans. And I say this humbly because I think we all got stuck in this place these last 40 years, believing that we held a value if we worked hard, got that house, lived that kind of life, that responsible life, only to realize, as I did about 7 years ago, as I reached that kind of place in my own life here in Marin County, California, which is a fairly affluent area, that we're going in the wrong direction, that American dream isn't about position. It's about generosity. It's about supporting one another, and I think that American dream has been warped in such a way, corrupted, that we need to realign our values and get back to what MLK certainly said. When I came to that realization, this is going to sound crazy, but I'll look back on it and say it was the most magical thing that I felt I could have done. And it was not easy, but I literally sold everything. It was a divorce. It was a whole rearranging of my life to one of activism, where I initiated some film projects that I had never made a film before, but I thought, I want to take back those dreams that I lost as a kid, but I need to do it in a way that sends a message and maybe shares some passion. And that ended up becoming my first film with Dr. Sylvia Earle about our oceans. I had wanted to study oceanography in college, and I lost that opportunity as a kid. But, I did other things in life. And we made a film really to share through the voices of 12 children. And this is pre-Greta, I'm going to say, 7 years ago, to share the devastation of what's happening to our oceans. And our oceans matter to us on every level. Every breath we take, we have to say thank you to our oceans. So, excuse me, that's my phone. I guess I should have turned that off. After that film, and we went international with that film, and the children were speaking about, hey, people, this is our future. Please, adults, listen to us. And I really thought that would send a strong message. And I found that people were entertained by the children, but they weren't listening to the message as some of us are. Some of us realize we are in a crisis. Our future is in a crisis. Our children's future is in a crisis. We need to shift. So after I made that film, I fortunately met Jose Neto. Now, Jose Neto I'd known a little bit from a couple of interactions, and my daughter was taking guitar lessons from him, and I started to learn about his history. He worked with Harry Belafonte for 30 years as his guitarist and musical director, and I started to really think about that as, wow, here's this individual, Brazilian guitarist. A lot of people don't even know who he is, yet he is one of the top. The London Times has written that he is beyond Jimi Hendrix. He was with Steve Winwood for 20 years. And why does any of this matter? Well, it matters because I started to realize how we have forgotten some of our icons, like Harry Belafonte, for example, and the kind of message that he brought to the table. He's still alive. I got to interview him actually for my second film, The Man Behind the White Guitar. And I thought, okay, let's send a message about that kind of spirit, right? Because it's not always about money that solves problems. It's about our spirit and our perspective. And Belafonte was one who said, hey, look at controlled domination and and fear. Look at it straight in the eye, put a smile on your face, and start dancing. Don't be afraid, and bring people together in a way to unify us. And I thought, that is a message I could stand by, because we really need that kind of spirit as the people. I don't see our problems so much as a left and a right issue. I see it as a top and well, I don't want to say top and bottom, but let's say the elite and the people, because we are the top. The people are the top. And we really got to reignite our power and bring ourselves together, and to recognize those who are exploiting us on every level. And so that film actually is now going to Guatemala later this month as a message to folks there. And we have had a really great run with that film, and really trying to share that kind of story and that kind of spirit. And that's the kind of messaging I want to be able to share as governor, is really that I'm here to support the people, the unions, the people who want to reorganize themselves, to empower themselves, to stand up to those who have been exploiting us with the amount of greed that a fiction book could not even capture. I mean, the absurdity that we have allowed these last 40 years, I think we're all beginning to realize has reached a climax, and we have to cut it, and we need to rearrange ourselves and do literally a bottoms up economic, health, and environmental issues. And we can do this in a way that Jimmy Carter actually advocated in the late 1970s, and that is make it an adventure. Make it an adventure, And I think that this is the time to do it, and let's do it. That's my message. And I have a lot of ideas that might seem shocking to some people, but really they're not that shocking. And I think this is a conversation that we need to start having. And one is healthcare. I mean, I think this last year and a half, we've really kind of woken up to the state of healthcare in our country. And it's not just about insurance, but it's also about the state of our health, right? I don't know about you, but I'm pretty shocked to read the statistics that 78% of the people who were hospitalized and died had major dietary and health issues, obesity, diabetes, and hypertension. That's kind of a wake-up call for all of us, 78%. Why aren't we talking about that? We're probably not talking about that because the junk food purveyors, not just the junk food, but the processed food corporations, let's just call them the junk food corporations, they have a handle, a hold, a power over our politicians right now, just like the fossil fuel industry. Let's call it that. They're funding our politicians. The first week of the pandemic, do you know what my kids were fed from our school? Fruit Loops, Cocoa Puffs, and Pop-Tarts. I thought, wow, that's really healthy food. And it's kind of a pandemic in itself in our country if you start to look around of how much we take kids up and how much of an opportunity we have as adults to really reshape our health habits in this country in a way that could be a beautiful journey for all of us to make. And we could do it in a way that gets us dancing together and eating right. And this could be done in such a positive way. Our farming is so centralized today on the top level. Bring it back down to the local communities. We can do that. I think more and more we realize that fresh, wholesome food that is more localized is a way of resistance to the centralized top dogs who are, again, exploiting us people. This is the time to do it. Let's do it. And I think, again, California is the place to do it. I'll tell you, I went out to Fresno, California with a group as an educational mission to see the land, the farming land in Fresno. It was supported actually by the Steyers, Tom Steyer and his wife. I was very grateful for that education. But I'm a lifetime Californian, Andrew. I grew up in this state. 3 generations, I guess, Irish heritage. We came here as workers and farmers. And to see that land and the devastation was the saddest thing I have ever seen in my life. Depleted. It's actually turning into a desert. You can see the salinization of the soil. The water table has literally sunk the ground. Now, this is Fresno. This is like the breadbasket of the world, part of the area. San Joaquin Valley, Tulare County. A lot of our food worldwide was grown in these areas. The water table, so the aquifers, have literally disappeared. The land has sunk, it was about 30 to 40 feet, just literally sunk because of the changes that we have caused due to agriculture and exploiting that land. That's opportunity for us to start healing. And we can do it. We can really do it. And these are, again, some of the messages I want to be able to convey and get behind the people who are trying to push these healing, these restorative practices that bring the power back to us, the people. I'm tired of politicians and the elite treating us like children and that they have the answers, when I keep looking and I'm seeing that they don't have the answers. They really don't. It's got to come back down to the grassroots level. And going back to the 1981 national strike and those air traffic controllers, those union members who were willing to, really take a stand for that on a unity, solidarity level, let's bring in that spirit and hold hands and do this together.
So you've talked about healthcare, agriculture, and unions. Would you say those are 3 big issues of your campaign?
Yes. I'd say all of those are the issues connected to the environmental movement, which has got to be the first and foremost agenda. It's kind of like a dovetail. All of these issues are completely connected and interrelated, right? The land devastation, that's related to climate change. Actually, it was great in Fresno. Well, I don't want to say the word great. It was educational in Fresno because at that event that I attended, the people there who were giving the presentation described the environment, the weather temperament in Fresno as once being one of Mediterranean climate. Okay, fairly gentle. Today it's a hotbed. It's a furnace. So that's an example of how land, when it's so exploited, it really affects just the weather climate itself. So let's take that as an example for the rest of us wherever we are. Coming back to our own local environments, our own local communities, and really strengthening them. The environment is the first and foremost. It's not just the land, but it is our oceans. And we've gone completely backwards this last year and a half with our oceans. Our oceans are acidifying at an alarming rate. We see it. We see it here on the coast. There are dead zones out in the ocean from overfishing, from all the pollution that we've been putting into the ocean. And when you stop to consider that 70% of our oxygen comes from the ocean, and that's Dr. Sylvia Earle talking, her deepness, we like to call her, the world's greatest oceanographer by far, who has spent most of her life, and she's in her 80s today, fighting for the ocean, trying to educate the rest of us. And we've got to catch up with her. When we realize that our oxygen that we breathe every moment, right as we're breathing right now, Andrew, we're connected to that ocean, and yet we as the people in our habits, we're exploding that gift. So our oceans and our land, we've got to really focus on, and we can do it on such a great level of adventure. And so, those would be, I'd say, my 4 top. Let's say environment, education, health, and economy.
I'm glad to hear you're optimistic because some of the stuff sounds very bad. So it's good that you're optimistic about it.
We're still alive, aren't we? As long as we are alive, we can keep kicking. And what is it? The donkey kicks hardest toward the end. I think a lot of us are ready to start kicking. And as I really am saddened by so many people who have died this past year and a half, let's take this as a lesson, right? This is a call out. The WHO has called this out too, saying that this is a health crisis, not just COVID, however you want to describe that, but it's our own state of vulnerability and our state of health. And, you know, the healthy people weathered this pretty well for the most part. People who you know, got the flu-like symptoms, were asymptomatic. We really need to carry on that conversation, because it was the people who were, you know, elderly aside, because that's, you know, that we have to take care of our elderly people, but we have to also take care of our bodies. And this is a wake-up call that we're not either educating our children, we're not taking on the responsibility ourselves, but we need to not only think about our own health, but that of the land and the ocean, and it's all related. And I think that is such a beautiful spirit as humans, really showing our better side. Andrew, we have shown the worst of ourselves, right, these last years, as we have been fighting it out, really bringing up the dregs of everything that we recognize is not good for a society. The division, the racism, the control, the inequities of money. So now let us start showing our good side. And we've got that side in us too. But we need that opportunity. And we need to have the politicians who believe in that of ourselves. You know, I don't need to have a politician tell me what to do. And I don't think most people do. What we need to do is have the people and each other align ourselves to say, this is what's right. And we're not going to take less. And we have to hold those corporations accountable. As one of my top issues as well, I guess this would be my 5th issue, is accountability. Full score, no excuses. From plastic companies to corporations, to the elites who are exploiting us, we don't have policies that protect the people. A stand for unions, just like Teddy Roosevelt, got to bring him into the picture. He said, well, if the capitalists get to organize, so do the workers. And this is the time. This is the time. And we need to bring that balance back in a way that's fair, while we also take on the responsibility of our own carbon output. And I think more and more people recognize that and want to do what's right. I think if we have the compassion and the sensitivity to one another to wear something over our faces so we can't breathe free-flowing oxygen, right? If we can do that for 1.5 years, being sensitive to other people's needs, I think we can share that same kind of sensitivity and passion to look out for our children's future. I think we have it in us to do that. We just got to turn the dial and say, all right, this is it. We can do it. We really can do it. And we have the examples in society to show us the way. Now, I'm a big Jimmy Carter fan. For 5 years, actually, this will be my 5th year. Here in California, I've been organizing annual events on his birthday to help us remember what he tried to do during his administration. Not everything perfect, but one thing he'd asked the American people was to reduce energy consumption. He asked people to be responsible, and that people were beginning, and he called it out. It was not a popular speech. They threw him under the bus for this, but he said, people, you're beginning to cater to materialism instead of purpose. He called it out. That was the Malay speech, as they called it. But boy, didn't he call it, because it's really been 40 years about the most greed exploitative era that I think we could ever have created. You know, the level of environmental disasters, when we knew in the 1970s about climate change, we knew. Denis founder of Earth Day, I had a great interview with him myself, and he said, you know, we knew. So what happened? What happened to these last 40 years when we had an administration who tried to stop climate change? That's kind of an ouch. And then we had our oceans acidifying when we knew. That's written in Denis Hayes' book called Rays of Hope, published in 1977. We have had a collapse in insect population of 70 to 80% in the last 30 years. A drop in wildlife, I think that's the other 70%. I mean, it keeps going, doesn't it? So we can kind of stop right now and go, oops, oops. This was our lesson. This is our shadow. As some people like to say it. It's like, this is our dark side, but hey, let's switch it around because now we know what's not working. I have absolute faith, Andrew. And again, as long as we are breathing and we are alive, we have that opportunity to make that change. And I would like, I don't know about you, but I'm going to look, I have 2 children. I'm going to look at my 2 children in the eye and say, kiddos, I did everything in my possible power to make sure that you guys have the kind of life that is positive, healthy, and supportive. And let us show them who we are. They did it in the 1960s, didn't they? So, hey, we can do it again. No problem. How's that, Andrew?
And sometimes people get by all the negative stuff that's happening and they get cynical. So it's good that you, on one hand, you recognize what's going on, because then that's the opposite side. Some people are sugarcoat everything. So it's good that you recognize what's going on, but also you have faith that we can do something. So we like to see that, Barbara. We like to see that.
There are a lot of optimistic people. The problem right now is we're being overrun by the media with every negative issue possible. They know that sells. People, for whatever reason, run into fear, right? Fear does not help us. You can use that fear to, or not fear, but your anger. Sometimes I have worked in anger in the past. Use it as energy. Use that energy, right? If you're in fear mode, push out of it, because that's debilitating. It really is. Take your first step of like, okay, this is my fear. What am I going to do about it? Because when you face your fears and rise above your fears, it's an empowering feeling like no other feeling. I used to be in the sailing world. I used to teach sailing. And this was actually not only like on the water, but in life. It was actually schooling. Let's call it schooling. I would take students out on the water and I would see the fear in their eye, like when every little whimper of wind came along and blew the sail. But little by little, as they started to learn how to manage the lines, the ropes on the boat, when they started to understand their body and how they move their body in a boat, and they learned that control of how to manage their space and ultimately their destiny, I'm speaking on a proverbial level here, the spark in their eye was beautiful. And that is what actually ultimately drove me to teach sailing. It was that spark in the eye, to see people come from a place of fear to absolute thriving life and joy, and seeing that smile on their face, conquering that fear that they had. And that is a proverbial, let's call it, story about where we're at right now. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. And if you are, then just take the necessary steps in that place of taking control of that what you don't feel in control, and that can be baby steps. One of my neighbors here, she's an elderly woman. I think she's in her 70s or 80s. Simply, she has been organizing cleanup parties in our local parks. We're supporting her with that. Now, you know what she's doing? She is creating a committee in our small town to start talking about our homeless, our unhoused in our own community. We have a few people, not a lot. We have more in the neighboring city, but we do have some. How can we as a community support these people, and get to know them as part of the fabric of our life here, and to make sure that they're okay and they have what they need? That's empowering. You know, she's probably in her late 70s, not even in the best of health, but she's doing that. And you should see the spark in her eye, Andrew. And like that's infectious. Yeah, talk about infectious. When you see somebody have a spark in their eye and they're motivated and they're doing it, it rubs off on you. And then you ask yourself, hey, I see what she's doing and the kind of change that she's been making right here in my own community. I want to get involved. I want to do something like that. Where can I create and take a problem and make it something that is good for all of us? And we all have that capacity. And it really doesn't take much. It really doesn't. And it's a beautiful way of bringing that community together. Last January, for example, now I have never really been too involved in the homeless communities in the past. Have I? I want to make sure that that statement is pretty true. Yeah, that's a pretty true statement. But last January, seeing the growing homeless crisis, which, you know, of course, we can understand would be a direct ailment from this past year when people were losing work, you know, and all that, we decided to do a hunger strike. There was just a couple of us. We went out on the street for 5 days, few hours each day, much in the spirit of S. Brian Wilson, who was one of the leading activists in the 1980s, who lost a leg trying to stop a train going to Central America with arms during those ugly wars of Central America. So he was actually the one who inspired me to do this. He did a hunger strike back in the 1980s. He did it for about, I think, 45 days. Well, I did it just for 5 days, but I wanted to see what that felt like. So I took a little sign, went out onto the street. I'd never done this before, and said I'm going on hunger strike for the homeless. What will happen? I didn't know what would happen, Andrew. I wanted to see what's going to happen. And I realized after a day or two, it was creating energy. People were coming up to me and talking to me. People were giving me money to give to the homeless people. People were giving me donations like tarps and other clothing to help them weather the cold weather that we were experiencing in January. Suddenly, other people decided to get involved and had fundraisers. Suddenly, we went out and started to meet the people in the unhoused community and learned that they were phenomenal people who were trying to organize themselves and stay safe, and that they were smart people who just didn't have a place to call home. And we made friends, and it started to build like this. And we thought, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And all it takes is a simple act to get out there and get yourself involved. And that act has continued to propel. We ended up making a few $1,000s, which got them at least a toilet. It got them some showers, some food, and it got them on the radar as needing help in our community, which has never, in the years that I've been here for 25 years, we've never had an unhoused community. And we have 4 of them now. And it's a wake-up call for all of us. We need to get involved. These are our people. These are our people. These are our fellow Americans. If they're hurting, I'm hurting. That project has continued on. Actually, this next weekend, I'm working with another community in Sausalito. As I've discovered, many of them are artists, incredible artists, actually. And so we're trying to support them, support themselves, and build them into our own community the best we can. And I think there's some good messaging in there. And what's also beautiful about this, Andrew, is when you do an act like that, you connect with other people who are as passionate about making things right as you are. And I'm humbled by them, because there are people who are doing such phenomenal work, and they're not getting the media coverage like they should. Right? There are so many people. Turn off the screen, get out into the streets, and start opening your eyes to seeing the people who are making the changes.
So these communities that you said you gave them toilets and you gave them showers. So I'm trying to picture what you're doing there. So you were shelter when you communities. You said communities.
Yeah, that's okay. Let's talk about that. So right now in Marin County, it's a pretty elite community, right? There's a lot of wealth here and very, very little housing for workers, and let's call it us the working poor. I'm considered part of that group, by the way. I have to rent my room out in order to live in an apartment as a single mom. So I'm very much aligned in how the working poor feel and how exploited we feel. The amount of rent that I pay is ridiculous, and that's the story for most people, especially based on the wages that we make. I also am a teacher. I teach children in nature. I am also a substitute teacher. I've done other things in my life, but that's where I feel my purpose is right now, is education. The homeless communities, many of them have lost their work, lost their jobs. They're in a desperate situation, but however, they are being dehumanized, right? We keep calling them, oh, they're poor, they're not smart, they're dirty, they're drug addicts. When you get into these communities, you find that they are incredible people. And I'm going to speak to the Sausalito community right now, who I've just recently got to know. I'm going to be there actually on Sunday bringing art supplies as a means to create things, to have a table at a farmer's market, from knitting to crocheting to basket weaving with non-native plants here from our mountains that are actually fire hazards, but working with them to create their own communities. A lot of them don't want handouts. When you talk to them, they say, you know what? We just want a fair shake at this. We want a place to live that doesn't cost us a fortune and makes another person wealthy. That's disgusting. We want free speech. Some of them are these incredible activists who are really trying to take a stand for what most of us should be actually standing for. So Sausalito community is probably a more unique community because a lot of them are former boat owners. They're from the sailing world. They're ones that follow a tradition of, I make my own decisions and I live by my integrity, okay? And we take care of each other. So in this particular community, they're taking a stand for that land that they're on right now, which is amidst a very wealthy community, to say, you know, I don't feel I have to earn $50,000 a year in order to have a humble home that is safe, right? So in the effort that I'm joining them, and I say this humbly because there are others who are doing it and I'm learning from them, of how to be involved and let them be the voice. And don't come in like I have the answers for them. That's called narcissism. If I go in, I tell them what to do and that they need to live in that kind of apartment or that kind of house. This is part of the bottoms up method. And they say it themselves. They say, no, I don't believe that. There should be housing that is affordable, that is safe, but let us do this. Let them do it. Let them have the voice and support them in their mission to set those kind of examples and steer the course. They're a very inspiring community. They're going to become more vocal here pretty soon because they have, after a court hearing, they're being moved from one space where they're at right now, which is very visible to the community, into a more remote area. But they're fighting for their rights. They really are. And I think their message, and they carry the message the best, they need to be supported with that kind of messaging. I find it so disgusting in a community where we live that we find it acceptable to have multi-million-dollar homes, people who live in these mansions, consume so much energy, consume so many resources, and believe that that is acceptable and somehow respect that. We have got to stop respecting that and start respecting people who do live humble and live with minimal resources and live with integrity. And that's the narrative that I think they're trying to share. and they're in a position, and they're very smart people. Some of them, yes, need a little bit more support. They've been through a lot of trauma. Some of them have, but others are very determined and said, this is the kind of spirit we all need. And I align with them. I look very much forward to joining them on Sunday. Again, some of them are very great artists. Artists have not been appreciated on the level that they should. Artists, as Harry Belafonte has said in some of his talks, they are the healers. They help bring us together, right? And so I'm very excited about this weekend. And as I learn more about them, as well as another community in San Rafael, I think we need to be behind them to let them steer the course and be the messengers, and stop trying to be their voice. Let them be their own voice.
So earlier you were talking about Denis Hayes' Ways of Hope. Your book, you said it's redemption, right?
Yeah, redemption, how Ronald Reagan nearly ruined my life, to be complete. Yes.
How can people get a copy of your book?
Yeah, okay. Well, they can order it directly through my website, barbramcveigh.com, which is a preferable method, because the other way is amazon.com, which Jeff Bezos, I can say a lot about him, but at least it's there for people to order. I can say a lot about Jeff Bezos and the whole Amazon scam as an artist and as a writer, because boy, the method that they use to lure writers for publication, which is really the only way for independent writers to publish, one of the few ways, it's pretty disgusting. So yes, if you're interested in my book, I share it on a humble level again. And I try to share the story, and I beat myself up a lot in this, because I really put myself out there, or at least I try to show the path that I was on for a while. It was a way that many of us were educated. You know, you work hard, you get a good job, you get a great house, you live in a good community, you live in a good school, you got it, you're doing the right thing. And I did all of those things. You know, I put myself through college. It were hard years. I also did a lot of traveling to places. I was always curious about places where people say you shouldn't travel to. Like, I lived in China for a while. I snuck in and out of Cuba. I spent time in the Balkans to understand what Eastern Europe was about. So, you know, I've been on a big journey these last years, as all of us have been, certainly. But in the book, I try to go through that in a way of exploring where we're at today. And I got caught up in the money, too. I raised my hand, believing that I was living a good life, a good, responsible life. That's how we were taught, until this crisis moment happened about 8 years ago, when I started to understand the ocean issues on a level that we all need to recognize. And I started to do my research, and I started to realize that I had been lured into a way of life that is so wrong. And I did the ultimate. I literally walked out of the house, got a divorce, lived in what I will call working poor status today as a teacher and more, to understand what the real heart of the problems are in our country. And it was the best thing I could ever have done, Andrew. I mean, literally, I threw everything away, and in a way of reshaping my life. And although I don't live in that kind of comfort, I kind of realized that comfort is a made-up illusion. You know, I live in a tiny place today. I have a small garden. I teach. I am able to put my energy and my time into things that actually matter. And as we spend so much time collecting and talking about technology and gadgets and all of that sort of stuff, it's like, whoa, we're kind of missing out on the most critical conversation. And that is about people and taking care of each other. And I feel like I got lucky, Andrew. I feel like I kind of missed a bullet on that one. And I'm so happy today in that regard. Happy, well, let's say not completely happy, more open to seeing what's around me and how many people are hurting, and knowing that my time and my energy can be spent in a way that is ultimately richer and more meaningful. And I feel so grateful for that. And I hope that, I share that voyage, that journey in my book. And I hope that can, my beating myself up, maybe some other people can start to see, wow, what has been this message these last 40 years? That American dream that we still talk about as having this house and having this certain way of life. That was an illusion, and it was a lie. And that was really, really wrong. Let's get back to the MLK dream, or John Lennon's ideas, right? Of dreaming and creating what we want. It's time, and we can do this.
So you mentioned things like Cuba. What was it like? How was your opinion of it, and how did you see things differently before and after?
Yeah, well, like most Americans, I got the story about Castro, and I actually had a friend who was in Cuba during the brigades, like when the entire shift happened. And so I really wanted to challenge what I had been taught. And so it was the year 2000 that I went, and things were softening up at that time. I mean, they weren't as hardcore as they were a few years later about if you were caught in Cuba. But I flew into Mexico and then on to Cuba, where the Cubans had no problem of my coming into the country at all. They said, welcome, not a problem. They didn't, stamp my passport. They gave me a little slip of paper instead. And I found that the vibrant artists and musicians there were incredibly inspiring. There was a reverence for older people. There was an artistic movement. I went and connected with some of the art communities and just found this incredible artistic community. I found a lot of the people just literally on the streets, and I'm a talker. I always love meeting people, especially people on the street, knew 2-3 languages, and many of them, not all, but many of them were very in tune with what was going on in the world. Okay. Much more than I was certainly led to believe in the beginning. Now, not to say that there wasn't, a lower economic level, right? I mean, people didn't have a lot of money, like, we think you have to have in order to live a good life. People were making life themselves. I remember I went on my honeymoon. My ex-husband, he was Italian, so he actually went on his Italian passport, so he was actually legal there, unlike me. But we were walking downtown and past a hair salon, a bunch of women. It was after hours, and they said, hey, come on in, we have a party coming on, and come join us and dance with us. We've got a little bit of food. And people were creating life around them, right? And being open arms with one another. It was really beautiful to see that. Again, economically, not great. But since that time, I've done some digging and just trying to understand more about Cuba. And there was a great film. Let's see if I can remember the name of it. It was called I'm sorry, Andrew, I'm not going to remember it, but I can tell you what it's about. It was about their oil crisis. I think that's what it was called, the Cuba's oil crisis. That's what it was. And it was after the collapse of the Soviet Union, right? All of their support was gone. And they went into an oil crisis. And they had to figure out how to survive. And this film does an amazing job capturing it, which could actually inspire the rest of us of what that might look like. And what they learned was that farming and food, the most essential work, top lawyers and business people suddenly were second fiddle to farmers and those who understood the earth and the land. And they became proficient organic farmers, to which they are to this day. In fact, that speaks to their very healthy reefs around Cuba, much healthier than other places that use pesticides and so forth. And people had to really reinvent themselves. I think there's some lessons there for us, because we'll eventually get to that point here in our country as we face an oil crisis, and that's going to come eventually. I think we all know it. It has to. But Cuba, I found, was amazing. Now, you know, the bad side, yes, there were people who were tricking us. You had to kind of be careful. A couple of times, not that we got robbed, but we had to really be careful, because we were looked at as the rich Americans, the capitalists, let's call ourselves. And, you know, there wasn't that much respect for us by some people. So we had to certainly watch ourselves. But as a whole, boy, you know, the Latin cultures, they know how to keep a spirit going through art and music. It keeps people vibrant. I have high regard for them, understanding that there's some certainly ugly history there too. But I think it's time that we look forward and create a new future for all of us. And hopefully I don't get thrown in prison for going to Cuba 20 years ago. And if I did, well, I would stick up for Cuba because it's time that we create a new future, all of us together.
That is very interesting to find out your experience in Cuba.
Yeah, it's not one unlike Guatemala. Actually, that is a project I'm working on right now. I was in my 20s. I was a huge explorer. Backpacks send me off. I went off on my own to explore and try to understand places that I had been taught to believe were a certain way or a certain thing. And over again, I found out that they were lies. Guatemala is a perfect example. And as we face our border crisis with so many immigrants, I think we can realize that, you know, maybe there's another story to all of this. I backpacked through Guatemala. So in my early 20s, that was in the early 1990s. I was fascinated by the Mayan indigenous people. I was also fascinated by the lack of education we had about how we participated in a lot of the American foreign policy in creating the trauma that happened in Guatemala, including under Reagan, the wars of the Central American wars. We were supporting the right-wing militias, not the people. And somebody needs to apologize for that. I want to be the one to apologize for that. And I actually have done that on a couple levels, just as a citizen of the United States, to say, I am so sorry that my government did that to you. So 3 years ago, when I heard about that young Mayan indigenous woman, Claudia Patricia Gomez Gonzalez, shot at the border. She was a 20-year-old Mayan indigenous woman trying to make her way to Texas to get work and go to school. Kind of a typical 20-year-old, right? Living in a place of poverty where she had been raised. I mean, poverty, but just not a lot of opportunity, different kind of opportunity other than her Mayan indigenous way. She was a curious kid. And she was shot in the head. When I read that story, Andrew, I was sitting in a cafe. I was so horrified by that, knowing that most indigenous Mayan women especially are some of the most gentle, kind, generous people you could ever meet. I bought myself a plane ticket and said, I'm going to go meet that family and apologize for the violence that my country continues to create. And I did that. I actually ended up getting sponsored by an immigration organization. But that project ended up, in my time there, cultivated another project. And being connected to the Guatemalan community here in Marin County, and we have a large community here, many of them who are my friends, and whose story I know their stories, and I've been part of that journey, knowing them for 17 years and watching them grow. One of whom actually made tamales, this is very sweet, made tamales for our film screening of The Man Behind the White Guitar about Jose Neto. So that was my film, which is online and available to see. All the money goes to underserved youth bound for college. So her name is Gabby, Guatemalan Gabby. She made tamales for us to help raise money for our film. She's not rich, right? And we found that so endearing that we, this year, said we're going to take the film to Guatemala to show the people in Guatemala that It's the simple acts that can create some magic. And I actually just got notified yesterday that the film is going to show on national television in Guatemala on June 25th and 26th. 1 month later, we're taking a delegation to Guatemala along with some Guatemalans and Americans, and we're going to go do a screening in the mountains of Guatemala where most of the immigrants are from, to give them support, to say, you have a beautiful culture. You know the land. You are our teachers. You know, many of them still farm organically, traditionally. They've been doing it for hundreds of years. We can learn from them. We really could learn from them. The food is amazing. It's a vibrant community. They just lack support. And they have been bulldozed by the right-wing government officials, the big businesses in Guatemala who continue to oppress them, much like our situation today in America. You know, and when we recognize for so long we've been on the wrong team in Guatemala, giving the wrong support, and instead of giving it to the people to navigate themselves, they're smart. They know how to do it. And instead of giving it to the business people and to the political leaders, I think we can recognize that we can follow a different path today. And this is most essential conversation right now. Kamala Harris just had a meeting, I think it was last week, with a lot of business people to go invest in Guatemala. I think we're smart enough to know what that means today. You know, too many business people go in and go, hey, look, we got some free, cheap labor here. I can make a profit for myself. We're not going to let that happen again. No way. It's time to support the people. They need health care. They need to be able to drive their own agendas. They're smart. They're organized. Stop making people who don't have money sound, I don't know, dumb or stupid. No, they're smart people. And they probably are more generous than others who have so much. And I think that really needs to be a conversation today. So yes, that's going to happen. It's going to be a peace and unity mission in late July. And this will all be on my website, by the way. This is all getting launched this week, this and next week. And we're so excited about aligning our power as the people here in California with those in Guatemala. And it's time for people to unify. You know, it's time. Central America is a beautiful area. I spent time in Costa Rica, which is a lot different, but I went there for about a month to try to understand what they're doing, that it might be different than the other nations. And I see as they're trying to go carbon neutral, they put a lot of emphasis on their nature. They have a spirit of pura vida, pure life. What is pure life? What is pure life? It's a community, good food, good friends, good family. You know, it's not that hard. And I think we've kind of lost sight of what can make us truly happy. I spent a lot of time in Italy. My ex-husband was from Italy, and I'd go up into the mountains, and they kind of got that. You know, and you'd go there because, oh my God, this is so beautiful and rich. And then you go to Guatemala and you say the same thing. It's like, this is so rich and beautiful. Why are they not receiving the same kind of respect and economic equity? And I think it comes back to how we view people and support people as the people. As governor, I want to be able to support the people in those kind of messages. And there are enough of us who want that kind of messaging and believe in those kind of values. And if there's ever a time in our environmental disaster today to live those kind of values, boy, this is the time.
So what was the name of that film again?
The Man Behind the White Guitar. So if you go to themanbehindthewhiteguitar.com, you'll find all the information. It is available for screening, and all the money for that film will go to underserved youth bound for college. We do not make any money. It was an international project by artists in Brazil, the UK, California, New York. The other film is called Racing with Copepods with Dr. Sylvia Earle.
I'm sorry, Racing with
Copepods. Copepods, Copepods. Copepods are tiny animal plankton in the ocean. They are the fastest animal in the world, some scientists believe, which kind of shares a message about a call to action for us today. We got to get into action and race faster than copepods. So Racing with Copepods, 12 children taking a stand for the ocean, was made 7 years ago. And my book, again, Redemption, How Ronald Reagan Nearly Ruined My Life. Andrew, I just did finish another book. It's kind of an impact project book called Fan Inc. And it's a dystopian story about how this last year's worth of fear could lead in a direction of a big tech takeover, which is a whole nother conversation, but it's really one to think about. But it's a fiction novella, very easy read. But I wrote it as a warning that I see that we have got to start decentralizing power and really, us, the people, take back our power.
So is that out yet? You said you
It is.
just finished it.
It is. It's available on my website as well as Amazon.com. And it's a story that is incomplete. It's a story to invite other people to add to it. Let's call it like a blueprint. I would like to make this a community project. Writing and art are incredible healing powers. When you can put what you feel into stories, it not only helps you overcome that trauma, but you start to see how it can affect other people and help them through their own trauma into a brighter way of thinking. That's my hope. We'll see. It's experimental, but it's a good story. I think there's some people who have read it. I just released it not too long ago. I haven't really promoted it, but yeah, take a look at it.
All right. So how can people get involved with your campaign for governor?
Thank you so much. My website right now, BarbaraMcVeigh.com. That's where I'm pulling things together. This summer, I'm pulling together the team after I finish this Guatemala project, which will be really a summer project, bringing together the immigrants, the homeless communities, as well as other environmentalists. I hope by September to really launch a full-fledged campaign and start pushing this into a narrative for this next year. I look for the 2022 election cycle. I'm not a big fan of recall. I feel that Newsom has done us so wrong. There is a totally other way of approaching the problems we face today than the fear methods that he has used, the fear and control methods. It's not a good example for anybody. So we can see that. And I think we'll continue to see that. So please, let's make this a movement and a bottoms up all the way. California can take the lead and show the rest of the nation how we do business. And this is the time to do it. There will be no other time like it is. And we have a small window to make this happen. Because power does not like to lose power. And we've got some big power players who are really trying to dominate. And we're not going to let them. No way.
We wish you the best with your campaign and all your activities.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for doing what you're doing too, with getting messages out and sharing stories and letting people like me talk. I think it's important to hear all voices, and I just really thank you for being a stand for that. Media, it's an important place to really push change as well. So thank you.
Sure, we appreciate that. Otherwise, we want to say thank you, Barbara. We want to get your message out to as many people as possible. So we wish you all the best in everything you do.
Great. Thank you, Andrew.
Have a great day now.
Will do. Thank you again.
Bye now.